Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Natalie. If you've never seen my face before, today we are going to do my March wrap up. We're going to talk about all the books I ended up reading in March, my thoughts about them, what I rated them, all of that stuff. I ended up reading 10 books in March, which I'm pretty happy about. It was a good reading month for me. I read a lot of really great books, so I'm excited to go through those and talk about them. I think I'm going to go in order, so I'm going to bring up my Goodreads. I will also link my Goodreads down below if you guys want to follow me on there and see what I'm reading currently. Okay, the first book I read in March was All the Dangerous Things. This book basically follows a woman whose son was stolen in the middle of the night from her home while she was married. She ends up divorcing this man, and the story kind of follows what happened to them. She ends up meeting someone that's involved in the true crime scene, and they try to start solving the case together. It has so many twists and turns. I loved this book, but I ended up rating it 5 stars. I'm a big thriller reader, and I feel like a lot of thrillers are very predictable and just easy to figure out along the way, but this book had so many turns. It kept me engaged the entire time, so I was literally obsessed with it. I would 100% recommend this book if you aren't into thrillers even. I think this is a really great book. The ending is not what you would expect, so I absolutely loved this. This was my first 5 out of 5 book in March, and honestly, I had a lot of 5-star reads in March, which I don't give out 5 stars a lot to books. Like, I feel like I'm pretty harsh with it, but I just had so many great reads in March, so this was a great start to the month. All the Dangerous Things was the very first book I read in March. So good, 5 out of 5. Okay, next up, the second book I read was Daisy Jones and the Six. I read this book because the Amazon Prime series was about to come out, and I had not read this. I've had it for quite a while now. I've only read one other Taylor Jenkins Reid book, which was Malibu Rising, which I really liked. I ended up giving Malibu Rising a 4 stars, so it was pretty good in my mind, but I just had never picked up Daisy Jones and the Six. I don't know why, but the series coming out gave me an excuse to pick it up. I read this in like 1 or 2 days while I was traveling, and I really enjoyed it. If you don't know the story, it's basically about a girl. She grew up in Hollywood, the Hollywood scene, with really wealthy parents. She ends up joining a band, which makes it Daisy Jones and the Six, because the Six was the band that she ends up pairing up with, and it follows their story kind of back and forth between characters. It was a little bit confusing at first. I didn't know if I was gonna like the point of view from all the different characters, because it basically just says their name and then what they say along the storyline. I didn't know if I would love that, but it ended up being really easy to follow in the end. I rated this a 4 star. I thought it was a good read. It wasn't everything I've ever wanted to make it a 5 star, but it's a great story, and I personally like Taylor Jenkins Reid. It goes through like a lot of hardships, addiction, things like that, so some hard stuff to read about, but in the end I thought the story was told really well between all the characters' point of views, and the ending is really cool because you find out who's basically interviewing all of the characters, and I thought that was really cool. I have yet to watch the series. I started the first episode. I only watched like 10 minutes into it, and it was very similar to the book, so I might end up watching the whole series. Let me know in the comments if you've watched it and liked the series. This was my second read in March. Third book I read in March was A Dash of Salt and Pepper by xoxo Jackson. I've never read anything by him. This is an LGBTQ plus story. It's about 2 men. One has dreamed about like becoming a huge business person. He went to college and ends up moving back home because he's kind of figuring his life out. He broke up with his boyfriend, so he's living in his small hometown with his parents right now, and he ends up meeting this chef that works at a restaurant. It's a cute little love story. I didn't love this book. It was very like okay in my mind. I gave it a 3 star. This was a random find I found in the airport when I was traveling, and I picked it up because on Goodreads one of the reviews said it was similar to Red, White, and Royal Blue, and if you know that book, it's another like LGBTQ plus book, but it's one of my favorite books. I gave it a 5 star, so I decided that if it was similar I would hopefully like this, and this was good. It wasn't great, but the love story is cute, and it's about 2 gay men, so I liked that aspect of it. 3 out of 5 stars. This was number 3 in March. The fourth book I read in March was Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. I had to pick this one up because I have seen so much about it on the internet, on TikTok, Instagram. Everyone was posting about it because the second one to this was coming out, which I actually have up here. I have yet to read, but hopefully that's on my April TBR. I absolutely love this book. I am a romance reader, but it's not my favorite genre, so sometimes I'm like weary about reading like super thick romance books like this. I don't know if it's gonna be worth it, but this book was so worth it. Naomi and Knox's love story was just everything like you could ever want it to be. I loved their characters. Their banter back and forth was amazing. But basically Naomi is like a runaway bride. She ends up in this really small town that her twin sister lives in, ends up basically taking in her twin sister's daughter. So she has so many problems going on in her life, but she feels very at home in this small town that she ends up in. She ends up meeting Knox Morgan. He's very standoffish when you first meet him. They're both standoffish towards each other, but they end up like forming a relationship obviously, and their love story is just so pure. I love it. I'm so excited to read Things We Hide from the Light because I gave this book a 5 out of 5. Loved it so much, and if you haven't read it, you definitely need to. The next 3 books I read were for a video where booktubers chose my reads for a week, so if you haven't seen that, make sure to go check that out on my channel. The first one was Before We Were Strangers, which was picked out by Sarah Caroli. This is basically about 2 people that met 15 years ago when they went to college. They became super close friends and ended up kind of as a couple, and then they end up going off their separate ways. However many years later, they run into each other again. It's kind of about them refinding their connection and just finding out more about each other, but there's a huge twist in the end, which I really enjoyed. So this I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. It was a really cute read. I thought the first part of it was kind of slow getting into it, so that's why I gave it a 4 out of 5. If you haven't read this, it's a great read to pick up, and I definitely recommend it. This one I actually cannot talk enough about. The next book I read in March was Archer's Voice. This has easily become one of my all-time favorite reads. Alexa Ray recommended this for my Booktubers video, and I fell in love with it. I do not ever cry during books, and this book I was absolutely sobbing at the end of it. The characters like touched my heart more than any characters have ever before. This book is basically about a girl running away. She runs away from her problems in Ohio, which I actually live in Ohio, so it's kind of funny. She goes to Maine, ends up in this really small lake town, and meets Archer. He is a deaf man, and she knows how to communicate because her dad was deaf, so they can still communicate. She kind of like breaks his shell open like no one has ever done before, because no one has ever really cared to get to know him after he had some issues growing up. There's so many plot twists in this story. The overall story will literally grab your heart and tear it apart. It's so sad, but the relationship that they build is just everything you could ever ask for. I love this book with my whole entire heart. I will always forever ever recommend it now. If you haven't read Archer's Voice, you have to read this book. I just realized I have so many 5-star reads in March, and it's not common for me to rate books 5 stars, so this was just a really great reading month for me. Next up was Say You Swear. Again, this is my last book I read for my Booktubers Choose My Books, and this was chosen by Julie, which is Books by JB on Instagram. If you guys follow her, she's the sweetest girl ever. She picked Say You Swear. I was very unsure about this book. It's kind of based around football, like a friend group, so I didn't know how I was going to feel about this book, but I ended up loving it. There's a huge plot twist in this book. Surprised me like no other. I would have never ever guessed it. I can't talk about it because it's definitely a spoiler, but if you have not read this book, you have to read it. I again rated it a 5 out of 5, which is so weird because I just don't rate books 5 out of 5 very often. Probably like a handful of books rated 5 out of 5, but apparently in March I picked up some really great books, and this was my 7th book I read in March. Okay, the 8th book I read in March was The Housemaid's Secret, which is the sequel to The Housemaid. This is by Frida McFadden. I absolutely loved The Housemaid. I thought it was such a great thriller. If you haven't read it, I definitely recommend, but I wanted to read the sequel because this one just came out pretty recently, and I love the first one, so I had to pick up the second one. This book was really great. Basically, it's about a housemaid who works for a lot of very wealthy people, so she kind of gets like insight into their relationships and how their home functions. There's a lot of secrets in it that she ends up discovering. Really crazy plot twist in the end that made this book super great. I gave this a 4 out of 5, and if you haven't read The Housemaid, definitely read that and then come back to Housemaid's Secret because these 2 books are really great. I love Frida McFadden's writing, and I need to pick up some more books by her because I am obsessed with her. On to my 9th book I read in March. It was Run on Red. This is like a random thriller that my girlfriend got me with a bunch of other books one time, and so I decided to pick it up and see what it was about. This book is honestly really like scary throughout. It's about 2 college girls who drive out to a party like in the middle of the woods one night. They end up getting stopped by this car, and they basically get into like a life or death chase with the 2 men in the car. They end up finding out who these men are and the secret behind why they are basically terrorizing the girls. It's really scary. Like, you're really on edge when you read this book. I rated this a 3 out of 5. It wasn't my favorite. You kind of do find out some weird things about these frat boys, and I feel like they could be honestly true in real life. It was really quick quick and easy to get through. Again, like really on edge the whole time, but I gave this a 3 out of 5, so it wasn't my favorite. I feel like this is gonna be my most controversial like rating of this whole wrap up. The final book I ended up reading in March was the first book of the Addicted series. This one is Addicted to You. I had heard so much about this series. It was posted everywhere, so I had this hyped up in my head so much and I was so disappointed. The story is about addiction. So the main girl is addicted to sex and the main boy is addicted to alcohol, and they basically live together and enable each other's addictions. So it's a very sad concept. I hated reading about the enabling between them. Their relationship is very toxic and I just didn't like the two main characters. It took me like 5 days to read this book because I thought it was really hard to get through, which I know addiction is a hard thing to get out of and probably a very realistic story of how something like this would go down, but it just was not it for me. I have heard though that the other books in this series get a lot better, so I might continue on reading them. Let me know in the comments if you've read this series and if the other books are better, because I had this book hyped up so much in my head and I was very disappointed by it. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but I would like to continue on if the other books are better, because I feel like the story could end up pivoting obviously from the ending. So let me know if you've read it and enjoy the other books more. I could see myself continuing on with this series if someone told me that the other books were better than this one, but yeah, Addicted to You was not my favorite at all and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. But those were the 10 books I read in March. There were 4 5-star reads out of the 10 I read, which is so unlike me to rate them, but again, I had some really great reads in March. Overall, it was a really great month of reading. Let me know in the comments the books you read in March, or if you recommend any that I should read in April. I'm very excited to continue on and hopefully find some really great books in April to read. I hope you guys enjoyed this little wrap up. Thank you so much for watching today's video and I'll see you guys in my next one.